Good morning, this is Brian. Today's a beautiful but warm January 17th. It's a Sunday, the year 2021. And today I want to present a spotlight on shrubs. Today's episode focuses on black sage, Salvia mellifera. Where I am right now is I'm about an elevation of 3,100 feet above sea level. I'm in the Elsinore Mountains, which are a subunit of the Santa Ana mountain range. I am in southwestern Riverside County, California. And this is South Main Divide Road, which is also called Killen Trail, K-I-L-L-E-N. And so, the black sage. This is a very common shrub here in Southern California. I don't know how far north it ranges, but I can always put a generalized description of the range in the description, so check the description for that. But black sage is a member of the mint family, the Lamiaceae, and it is what the name suggests. It's a sage, a true sage. It's a very aromatic shrub, not strongly woody, but with great age, the shrubs can develop some pretty nice trunks with furrowed bark. This shrub seems to be a pretty old specimen. So if we go down here, you can see the gray shreddy bark. It's pretty common in older sage specimens, the ones at least that form shrubs. Black sage is characterized by having relatively narrow, minty green leaves, and the shape of the leaves are quite mint-like as well. Usually they're smooth-edged, but sometimes they have very minute teeth along the edge of the leaves. And they have a very strong, but very refreshing and clean scent, like a nice chunk of our sages do. So, basically, again, black sage is a shrub. It starts out very herbaceous, and then it starts developing wood with age. Generally, quite weak wood. I don't believe there's really any part of this shrub that is strongly woody, and the stems are quite brittle and snap easily. So if you're hanging out with black sage or any other shrub species of sage, just be careful because they can be damaged quite easily. It's quite a resilient plant. It's known to grow in quite dry areas like San Diego. However, they typically grow where there is a coastal influence. Now, where we are, we're quite a ways inland. Like I said, we're in Riverside County, and it does grow in Riverside County, of course. Here's the evidence right here in front of me. But generally, black sage is a low elevation and relatively coastal plant. In other words, it grows where you tend to have more coastal influence. Now, this portion of these are the Santa Ana Mountains over here. I know they probably block some, but not all, of the marine layer influence, since this is a very low portion of the mountain range. So we probably do get some coastal influence here, obviously. This black sage, I do not believe is very cold tolerant. It's definitely less cold tolerant than white sage, and check my December 2nd video for the spotlight on white sage, Salvia apiana, and just compare those. White sage I've seen higher than 5,000 feet. Black sage, sometimes I see it above 3,000 feet, and we're about 3,000 feet. Sometimes you'll see it maybe a little bit higher, but your bet is you're going to have to be below 4,000 feet to really see this plant. So, right now, the plants look like they're getting greener. During times of the year these plants will be really lush. Other parts of the year, they'll sometimes look like they're half dead. Now that's because of their strategy to survive the dry season. We are in a climate which experiences a few months of wet and several months of dry. So the end of last month, end of December, we had a significantly wetting rainfall here in Southern California. So these plants are responding by sending up new leaves. And the new leaves are by far the most resinous and the strongest smelling. The old leaves are usually semi-persistent, though black sage will tend to shed some of its foliage, shed its lusher foliage, and retain some of its not so lush foliage during the summer when it's dry. And so the plants will sometimes look really raggedy and very like half dead. But usually they will have at least a fair amount of leaves still on them, but the leaves will look kind of crinkly, kind of curled, kind of revolute, kind of like this, only green. But even the most of the leaves will still be alive. They'll just be very dehydrated looking, and that's how they survive. And then when the new leaves start coming out, the old leaves will eventually wither and drop away because they don't need those anymore. They're replenishing them with the new batch of foliage here. So the foliage that's during the summer and fall months when it's bone dry, it's like I said, very dehydrated looking, and you have to really rub the leaves harder to get that sage smell. Now, once the new leaves come out during the wet season, the smell is very strong. Coming here after a rainfall is going to be a delight, because this plant lets off a nice odor after rainfall. It's a very resinous plant, and you can smell it from far distance away, especially on warm days like today. So the black sage is one of our known wildflowers. It typically blooms in the spring months after the rainy season has replenished the soil moisture. So what happens is they get these staged heads here. You'll see a stalk growing from the end of the twigs. It'll be green and lush, and then you'll see the flower buds. They're staged around like a lot of members of the mint family. You can see they're staged around here like this. And then the flowers are quite small. They're your typical mint family flowers. They're small. They're anywhere from whitish to light bluish, maybe a slight tinge of purple in it. Very light colored flowers. Small flowers, much smaller than a lot of the other showier sages. But the name mellifera means honey bearing. Bees love black sage. They love sages in general, but they love black sage. They love the nectar from this plant, and it's supposed to make a really, really good honey from what I've read. I've never tried black sage honey, but black sage honey is supposed to be very tasty. Very tasty. I'm going to have to try it out one day. Another thing is after the flowers are done, they turn into these little seed heads where they'll have little tiny little sand grain like seeds in them. Like I said, they're very brittle. I'm not trying to break it off, but that little speck right there in the middle of my hand, let me wipe that away. That little speck right there you can see on my hand, the palm of my hand, that's a seed. And from my understanding is black sage seeds are supposed to be pretty nutritious. I believe that's true with a fair amount of the sages. I don't know too much about it, but I would do a little more research before pounding seeds out of the seed heads and start chomping on them. But from my understanding, and I will post a little something about that either in the comments or in the description, is that they're supposed to be pretty nutritious, like chia. The plant chia is a sage. You got Salvia hispanica, which is the Chia sage you see sold in the grocery store, and then you got Salvia columbariae, which is the native Chia sage, which is grown out here, is natural, it's native, and it's an annual. It's not even a shrub. It's an annual herb, but it is a sage. But I don't believe it's supposed to have that sagey smell. So a lot of these light green, except for that patch right there of coyote brush, a lot of these lighter colored shrubs are black sage. So it's kind of interesting to try to surmise where the common name black sage came from. So there are a couple of theories surrounding why the name black sage came about. Well, look, if you look at the twigs from a distance, you look at, like, so especially the brittle, sometimes the dead twigs, they're very dark colored from a distance. When you get up closer to them, when the sun's on them, they look a little lighter. But it's possible that the really dark color of the twigs gave rise to the name black sage, the common name. So, habitat for black sage. Black sage does inhabit a fairly wide variety of niches, ecological ecotones. Where I am right now is a disturbed area. This area was, I guess, dug out decades ago, and so black sage likes to colonize disturbed areas, and it also loves to grow in coastal sage scrub and in openings in chaparral, and sometimes along the side of trails in woodlands too. It likes to be out in the sun. Black sage loves to be out in the sun. That's why areas that are cleared from a lot of heavy vegetation will see black sage colonize. And in good years, you'll see lots of black sage seedlings in the winter and spring months. I don't know if that means their seed viability is high or just their output is insanely high. But black sage is a pretty good reproducer. I've been in places where I've seen tons of black sage seedlings, especially in disturbed areas like this. As another reason for coyote brush to be coming up here so heavily. But black sage is weird. About black sage is you're not always going to find it where you expect to find it, in coastal sage scrub or chaparral, openings in chaparral. Because there's some places where you're going to see black sage all over the place. But then you're going to go then you might go further down the trail and you might not see any black sage at all, and you might see white sage instead. Now, black sage and white sage do integrate and grow with each other, and I've seen it on many, many occasions. And I've also seen evidence of hybridization between white and black sage, which happens wherever they grow together. And it's not really that rare. It looks very intermediate between the white sage and the black sage. I don't have any examples here to show you because there are none. But they do hybridize where they grow together. But I really don't have a reason why, or know the reason why, some places will have tons of black sage, and then further along will inexplicably have very little to no black sage, despite it being an apparently suitable habitat for them. And like I said, dry coastal sage scrub, openings in chaparral, disturbed areas, and clearings in woodlands where you get access to sun is where you'll find it. But where it is common, it can be a wholly abundant plant. Wholly abundant. So another thing I want to note about the black sage is I believe has been known as a culinary herb. I don't see why that would be a problem, as it has a very savory smell to it. I've never tried it, but again, if I were you, I would do a little more research before just grabbing a bunch of it and putting it in your salad. But again, I always try to urge a little bit of caution in people, you know, especially people who might not be familiar with it. But from what I understand, black sage is a very savory culinary herb as well. Again, you smell it. It smells great. So why do these plants like sage and sagebrush and a lot of other aromatic plants have such really pungent aromas? Why do they have such strong odors? What to humans often smell very delightful and quite delectable. Well, a lot of the essential oils, resins, and stuff like that are used to deter herbivory. In other words, to deter them from being chomped on by animals. A lot of times the animals will find the taste to be bitter and unsuitable, so the animals will move on to less pungent plants. And that's a chunk of the reason why black sage is so aromatic, so it doesn't get chomped on by all the herbivorous animals. But again, sometimes people like to use those really pungent herbs in their food. So, but for a lot of animals out here in the wild, probably like deer and stuff, they probably won't be too crazy about eating black sage. But there you have it. Salvia mellifera, the black sage. Really cool plant in the coastal sage scrub and chaparral. Beautiful plant. Smells great. And you can order seeds online. I've tried growing this plant before, and I've had some black sages germinate for me, and I had one that I had for a couple of years. It was starting to grow, but for some reason I might be good at growing quite a few things, but I've always had trouble with sages, and that's pretty much in general. But black sage, I believe you can get it commercially. It makes a great plant in the garden. It really does, and it doesn't need a lot of room. It doesn't need to take up a lot of room. So even if you have like a square, like a rectangle planter, you could probably just go ahead and put a couple plants in there. So there you have it. Salvia mellifera, black sage, Lamiaceae, mint family. This is Brian's Spotlight on Shrubs, and I hope you found this video informative and interesting, and I will see you on the next episode. Hopefully soon, not like the last time.